March 2nd, 1999. Henley-on-Thames, England. Dusty Springfield was dying. The woman whose voice had defined a generation, whose soul-stirring songs had made millions believe in love, lay in her bedroom overlooking the Thames, her body consumed by breast cancer. At 59 years old, she was frail, exhausted, her once immaculate blonde beehive now replaced by a simple scarf covering her bald head. The makeup that had been her armor for decades was gone. For the first time in her adult life, the world might have seen Mary O'Brien, the girl from West Hampstead who had spent 40 years hiding behind the persona of Dusty Springfield. But there was no world watching. Outside, the Thames kept moving, calm, indifferent, eternal, as if even the river refused to look back. She was alone. The official cause of death would be listed as breast cancer. Simple, medical, final. But for a woman who once said, "I'm the saddest girl with the happiest voice," could her death really be separated from the decades of loneliness, addiction, and self-destruction that had preceded it? In her final weeks, Dusty had given instructions. When she died, no sad songs should be played at her funeral, only her own. It was a request that captured everything about her, defiant, self-aware, and heartbreaking. She had spent her entire life singing about love for others while never believing she deserved it herself. Even in death, she was performing. She had turned performance into survival, and survival into art. Dusty Springfield had been called the White Queen of Soul, the greatest British female vocalist of all time, a voice that could make you believe in redemption even as she was drowning in despair. She recorded some of the most iconic songs of the 20th century, became the first white artist honored at Stax Records in Memphis, and influenced generations of singers from Elton John to Amy Winehouse. But behind the platinum wigs, the dramatic eyeliner, and that unmistakable voice, there was a woman who never stopped running from herself. She once wrote in her diary, "People hear me sing and think I'm strong. But every song I sing is a question I never got to ask. What drives someone to build a sound that could hide the sound of their own crying? What kind of loneliness can a voice that beautiful not cure?" Was Dusty Springfield a victim of an industry that demanded perfection? Or did she become complicit in her own erasure? To understand how it all ended in that quiet room by the Thames, we must first understand how it began in West Hampstead, where a shy, insecure Catholic girl named Mary O'Brien learned that to be loved, you had to become someone else entirely. Mary Isabel Catherine Bernadette O'Brien was born on April 16, 1939, in West Hampstead, London, into a strict Irish Catholic family. Her father, Gerard O'Brien, was a tax consultant who believed in discipline, order, and emotional restraint. Her mother, Catherine, was a housewife who suffered from depression and rarely showed affection. Mary grew up in a household where feelings were suppressed, where vulnerability was weakness, and where love was conditional, earned through obedience and performance. She learned early that to be acceptable, you had to be perfect, and perfection, she discovered, was exhausting. As a child, Mary was painfully shy, awkward, terrified of disappointing anyone. She would spend hours alone in her room listening to American jazz and blues records, mesmerized by singers like Ella Fitzgerald, Peggy Lee, and Mahalia Jackson. These women sang with a freedom, a rawness, an emotional honesty that Mary had never been allowed to express. When she sang along in her room, something shifted. The girl who couldn't speak up in class, who flinched at her father's stern voice, who felt invisible in her own home, that girl disappeared. And in her place was someone else, someone powerful, someone who could feel. She learned early that to be acceptable, you had to be perfect. It was the first lie she ever believed, and she built her whole life around it. Did music save her? Or did it teach her that the only way to exist was to become someone other than Mary O'Brien? At school, Mary was bullied for being different. too tall, too awkward, too serious. She didn't fit in with the other girls who talked about boys and makeup and marriage. Mary felt alien, disconnected, as if she were watching life happen to other people but could never participate herself. And then there was the other thing, the thing she couldn't name, the thing that made her different in a way that felt dangerous. She noticed that when her classmates talked about boys, she felt nothing. But when she looked at certain girls, she felt something she couldn't articulate, something that terrified her. In 1950s Catholic London, there was no language for what she was feeling, no framework for understanding. There was only shame. Was this the moment that fractured her? The realization that who she was could never be acceptable? Mary's escape came through music. At 16, she joined a folk group called the Lana Sisters, performing at small clubs and coffee houses around London. It was amateur, unglamorous, barely paid, but it was hers. For the first time in her life, Mary had a place where she belonged, where her voice mattered. She wasn't Mary O'Brien on stage. She was a performer, a singer, someone worth listening to. But even then, she felt like an imposter. She would rehearse obsessively, record herself singing, and then listen back in horror, convinced she wasn't good enough, that any moment someone would expose her as a fraud. Perfection became her religion. If she could just sing flawlessly, hit every note perfectly, control every breath, then maybe she would be worthy of love. Could she have imagined then what kind of prison she was building for herself? In 1960, Mary formed a new group with her brother Tom and a friend, Tim Field. They called themselves the Springfields, and they specialized in American folk and country music. The group found modest success in the UK, but it was Mary's voice that stood out, rich, soulful, aching with an emotion that seemed too big for the clean-cut folk arrangements. Audiences couldn't take their eyes off her. There was something magnetic about the way she sang, as if she were channeling a pain she couldn't speak aloud. But Mary was still hiding. She wore conservative dresses, smiled politely, played the role of the nice Catholic girl. She was still Mary O'Brien, trying desperately to be acceptable. And then, in 1963, everything changed. The Springfields disbanded, and Mary decided to pursue a solo career. But she knew that Mary O'Brien would never be a star. She needed to become someone else, someone glamorous, mysterious, untouchable. She dyed her hair platinum blonde, adopted a dramatic makeup style with thick black eyeliner and false eyelashes, and changed her name to Dusty Springfield. Mary disappeared that day. Dusty was born, not from joy, but from necessity. The transformation was complete. Mary O'Brien ceased to exist in public. In her place was Dusty, a manufactured icon, a carefully constructed fantasy, and the world fell in love with her. By 1964, Dusty Springfield had become one of the biggest stars in Britain. Her voice had evolved from folk clarity into something richer, more soulful, influenced by the American R&B and Motown records she obsessively collected. She studied singers like Aretha Franklin, Martha Reeves, and Dionne Warwick, trying to understand how they infused every note with such raw emotion. She once said, "I wanted to sound like Aretha Franklin. I ended up sounding like a ghost of her." But what Dusty created was something entirely her own, a voice that was simultaneously powerful and fragile, confident and desperate, joyful and heartbroken. It was the sound of someone singing to save their life, but there was more to Dusty's artistry than just vocal technique. She became a fierce advocate for black musicians at a time when the British music industry was deeply segregated. In 1964, she was invited to perform on a televised concert series in South Africa. When she arrived and discovered that the audience would be segregated by race, she refused to perform unless black and white audience members could sit together. The South African authorities denied her request. Dusty canceled the performance and was promptly banned from the country. The incident made headlines, but it also made her enemies. British conservatives accused her of being a troublemaker, of inserting politics into entertainment. But Dusty was unmoved. "Music doesn't belong to one race," she said. "If you're going to tell me who can listen to soul music, then you don't understand what soul means." The irony was not lost on her. Here was a white British woman fighting for the right to honor Black American music, while simultaneously hiding the most fundamental truth about herself. She could advocate for others' freedom, but she couldn't claim her own. The contradiction gnawed at her. Every public stance she took for justice made her more aware of her own cowardice, her inability to live openly, to love freely, to be Mary O'Brien in public instead of always Dusty Springfield. Was her activism genuine, or was it a way of deflecting from her own secrets? Perhaps it was both. Perhaps fighting for others was the only way she knew how to fight for herself. Her breakthrough came with the song "I Only Want to Be With You," which became a massive hit and established Dusty as a major force in British pop. She became a fixture on television, a fashion icon, a symbol of 1960s glamour. But success only intensified her insecurities. She became obsessed with control over her image, her sound, her performances. She would spend weeks in the studio perfecting a single line, demanding take after take until her voice was raw and her engineers were exhausted. When recording one particular song, she worked for 3 weeks on one phrase because, she said, "I couldn't feel the happiness in the lyrics." Happiness, it seemed, was something she could perform but never inhabit. Behind all that glamour, was there an unbearable loneliness that nobody saw? The more famous Dusty became, the more isolated she felt. She lived alone, trusted no one, spent nights awake in her flat, chain-smoking and listening to her own records, analyzing every flaw, every imperfection. She couldn't bear to let anyone see her without makeup, without the wig, without the armor. The real Mary O'Brien was locked away somewhere, and Dusty Springfield was the only version of herself that was allowed to exist publicly. But privately, Mary was still there, terrified, lonely, desperate for connection. She began drinking heavily, taking pills to sleep, pills to wake up, pills to get through performances. And through it all, she kept singing about love as if she understood it, as if she had ever experienced it, as if it were something meant for people like her. In 1968, Dusty traveled to Memphis, Tennessee to record what would become her masterpiece. Dusty in Memphis. She wanted to work with the legendary musicians at American Sound Studio, the same studio that had produced hits for Aretha Franklin and Wilson Pickett. But the sessions were torturous. Dusty was convinced she didn't belong there, that she was a fraud, a white British woman trying to sing Black American soul music. The musicians loved her. They could hear the genuine emotion in her voice, the respect she had for the music. But Dusty couldn't hear it herself. She would record a take, listen back, and immediately demand another. The perfectionism that had always driven her now bordered on self-destruction. She became everything she ever wanted, and discovered that everything was nothing at all. The album included what would become her signature song, a track that perfectly captured the contradiction of her life, singing about desire and intimacy while feeling fundamentally unlovable. When recording vocals in the studio, Dusty insisted on turning off all the lights except for a single dim bulb illuminating the microphone. She told the engineers, "Love doesn't need to be seen, only felt." In the dark, she could finally sing without pretending to shine. The moment was so striking that decades later, filmmaker Ridley Scott would recreate it in a movie. But what the engineers didn't know was that Dusty needed the darkness not to create atmosphere, but to hide. In the dark, she could be vulnerable. In the dark, she could let Mary O'Brien out just for a moment to sing the things she could never say in daylight. Dusty in Memphis became one of the greatest albums of all time, praised by critics and beloved by musicians. but it was a commercial disappointment, selling poorly on its initial release. Dusty was devastated. She had given everything, her voice, her soul, her sanity, and it still wasn't enough. The album that she had poured her entire being into was dismissed by the public. It confirmed her deepest fear, that no matter how perfectly she sang, no matter how much she gave, she would never be truly valued, never be truly loved. Was this the moment she gave up, or was it simply the tipping point of a lifetime of self-doubt? The 1970s were Dusty's descent into darkness. Her career in Britain collapsed. The music industry was changing, and Dusty's brand of sophisticated soul seemed out of step with the times. But more than that, Dusty herself was falling apart. She moved to Los Angeles, hoping for a fresh start, but found only deeper isolation. She lived in a series of anonymous hotels and rented apartments, drinking excessively, taking drugs, unable to work, unable to sleep, unable to function. She would sing to herself late at night, her voice echoing through empty rooms, the only audience the ghosts of who she used to be. The Los Angeles years revealed the full extent of Dusty's unraveling. She became reclusive, paranoid, convinced that people were following her, that the walls were listening. She would call friends at 3 a.m, incoherent, desperate, begging for help, but unable to articulate what kind of help she needed. One former backing singer recalled visiting Dusty's apartment and finding it in complete darkness, curtains drawn, ashtrays overflowing, empty bottles everywhere. It was like walking into a tomb, the singer said, and Dusty was sitting in the middle of it all, playing her old records, crying. She kept saying, "That's not me, that person doesn't exist anymore." And I didn't know if she meant the woman on the record or the woman sitting in front of me. There were brief attempts at comeback. She recorded a few albums in the mid-1970s, but they were commercial failures. Critics praised her voice. It was still powerful, still distinctive, but noted that something essential had gone out of it. The spark, the joy, the life force that had made her recording so compelling, it had dimmed. Dusty knew it too. She told one interviewer, "I used to sing like I believed every word. Now I sing like I'm trying to convince myself." The honesty was devastating. She had built her entire career on making others believe in love, in hope, in the possibility of happiness. But she had lost the ability to believe it herself. And then there was the other reason she had fled Britain. The press had begun asking questions about her personal life, about why she was never seen with men, about the close friendships she had with certain women. In 1970, Dusty did something almost unthinkable for the time. She gave an interview to a British magazine in which she obliquely acknowledged that she was attracted to women. They loved her voice until they learned who it belonged to. The backlash was immediate and brutal. The tabloids mocked her. Radio stations stopped playing her music. Television shows canceled her appearances. In an era when homosexuality was barely tolerated and female homosexuality was invisible, Dusty's honesty was treated as a scandal, a betrayal, a joke. She retreated further into herself, deeper into addiction, further from any possibility of redemption. Did this tragic event mark her downfall? Or was it simply the tipping point of deeper problems? The woman who had once been one of Britain's biggest stars was now a recluse, broke, forgotten, self-destructing in slow motion. She stopped recording. She stopped performing. She barely left her apartment. Those who saw her during this period described a woman who seemed like a shell, a ghost haunting her own life. Her brother Tom, who had been with her since the Springfields, tried to help, but Dusty pushed him away. She pushed everyone away. The only relationship she maintained was with Norma Tanega, a singer-songwriter she had loved deeply, the person she called the only light of my life. But even that relationship ended, fractured by distance and Dusty's inability to accept love when it was offered. Can anyone ever truly escape from the shadow of their darkest moments? By the mid-1980s, Dusty Springfield had become a tragic footnote, a cautionary tale, a "where are they now" story. She was living in obscurity, struggling with alcoholism, estranged from the music industry that had once celebrated her. She slept on the floor of her apartment because, she said, beds were too quiet. She would call her ex-lover late at night, not to speak, but just to hear the sound of breathing on the other end of the line, a reminder that somewhere someone was still alive, still real. The glamorous icon had become a woman so broken that she could barely remember who she had been. And then, in 1987, something unexpected happened. The Pet Shop Boys, who had grown up idolizing Dusty, invited her to collaborate on a duet. The song was called "What Have I Done to Deserve This?", a title that seemed almost cruelly appropriate for Dusty's life. She was reluctant at first, convinced that no one cared about her anymore, that her voice was ruined, that she was finished. But Neil Tennant and Chris Lowe believed in her. They saw past the addiction and the self-destruction to the artist who had inspired them. They coaxed her back into the studio, treated her with respect and patience, and slowly, carefully, reminded Dusty Springfield why she had started singing in the first place. The recording process was difficult. Dusty's voice, ravaged by years of smoking and drinking, wasn't what it had been. But there was something in the weariness, the vulnerability, that made the performance even more powerful. When the song was released, it became a massive hit, reaching #2 in the UK and the top 10 in the US. Suddenly, Dusty Springfield was back. Award shows invited her to perform, magazines interviewed her. A new generation discovered her music. The woman who had been forgotten was remembered. The world had finally caught up with her music, but not with her heart. But was it redemption, or just a temporary reprieve from oblivion? The success of "What Have I Done to Deserve This" gave Dusty a few more years in the spotlight. She recorded a new album, Reputation, which was critically acclaimed. She performed at concert halls and television shows. She was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. She was finally recognized as one of the greatest vocalists of her generation. But privately, Dusty was still struggling. The addiction, the depression, the self-loathing, none of it had gone away. The applause was wonderful, but it couldn't fill the void. The awards were meaningful, but they couldn't make her believe she was worthy of love. Elton John, one of her closest friends, said, "Dusty never knew how great she was. She sang like an angel, but she saw herself as damaged goods." In 1994, Dusty was diagnosed with breast cancer. She fought it privately, telling almost no one, continuing to work even as the disease progressed. She recorded a final album, but her voice, once so powerful, was now fragile, thin. Still, there was something achingly beautiful in those final recordings, a vulnerability, a resignation, a kind of grace. She was no longer trying to be perfect. She was simply trying to say goodbye. By 1998, the cancer had spread. Dusty knew she was dying. She gave a final interview, and when asked what she wanted people to remember about her, she said, "I hope they remember the voice. I hope they remember the songs, and I hope if I ever go, they don't play sad songs, they play mine." It was vintage Dusty, deflecting, performing, refusing to acknowledge the tragedy even as it consumed her. But it was also perhaps her final act of defiance. She had spent her entire life hiding Mary O'Brien behind Dusty Springfield. And now, at the end, she was asking the world to remember only Dusty, the voice, the songs, the illusion. Mary O'Brien could disappear just as she always had. Were these final decisions acts of surrender or courageous acts of self-preservation? On March 2, 1999, Dusty Springfield died at her home in Henley-on-Thames. She was 59 years old. The official cause of death was breast cancer. But those who loved her knew that Dusty had been dying for decades, slowly, quietly, painfully. The cancer had simply finished what loneliness, shame, and self-destruction had started long ago. The funeral was small, private, attended by close friends and family. True to her wishes, they didn't play sad songs. They played her music, those soaring, soulful recordings that had made millions believe in love, even though Dusty herself never could. As her voice filled the chapel, many of those present wept, because they understood finally what Dusty had been trying to tell them all along, that the voice wasn't separate from the pain. The beauty came from the wound. She had built a sound that could hide the sound of her own crying, but if you listened closely, if you really listened, you could hear it. You could always hear it. The world mourned Dusty Springfield, but the grief was complicated. She had been so private, so hidden, that most people felt like they were mourning someone they had never really known. Newspapers ran obituaries praising her vocal talent, but glossing over the struggles, the addiction, the queerness that she had been punished for during her lifetime. The music industry, which had abandoned her in her darkest years, suddenly claimed her as an icon. Everyone wanted to honor Dusty Springfield, but no one wanted to talk about what had killed Mary O'Brien. In the years following her death, Dusty's reputation only grew. Dusty in Memphis was reissued and finally recognized as the masterpiece it had always been, ranked among the greatest albums of all time by Rolling Stone and other publications. Her influence could be heard in everyone from Amy Winehouse to Adele to Lana Del Rey, singers who understood that the most beautiful voices often belong to the most broken people. Documentaries were made, biographies were published, tribute concerts were held. And Dusty's music found new audiences, new generations who connected with the longing, the yearning, the desperate hope in her voice. But there was also a reckoning. LGBTQ+ activists began reclaiming Dusty as a queer icon, someone who had suffered for her identity at a time when there was no community, no support, no language for who she was. They pointed out that Dusty had been punished for her honesty, that the industry that now celebrated her had destroyed her when she was alive. They asked uncomfortable questions. How many Dusty Springfields had there been? How many talented, queer, complicated women had been erased, silenced, driven to self-destruction because they didn't fit the acceptable narrative? What secrets did Dusty take to the grave? What hidden truths might still remain untold behind her public image? Dusty Springfield's legacy is painful and beautiful in equal measure. She left behind some of the most iconic recordings of the 20th century. Her voice, that smoky, soulful, impossibly expressive instrument, remains one of the greatest in popular music history. She broke barriers as a white artist in black soul music, earning respect from legends like Aretha Franklin and Otis Redding. She influenced countless singers who came after her. She created art that has outlasted her pain, but her life also stands as an indictment of a culture that demands perfection, that punishes difference, that treats artists as products to be consumed and discarded. Dusty Springfield spent her entire life trying to be good enough, trying to earn love through performance, trying to hide the parts of herself that didn't fit. And in the end, the hiding killed her just as surely as the cancer did. She sang about love with such conviction that millions believed her, but she never believed it herself. To be adored by the world and unloved by yourself, that, as she once said, is the cruelest luxury. There's a tragedy in the fact that Dusty's greatest gift was also her greatest curse. Her voice could convey emotions she couldn't feel, could offer comfort she couldn't accept, could make others believe in love she didn't think she deserved. She once wrote, "You can't sing about love when you don't believe you deserve it." But she did. She sang about it with such beauty, such longing, such hope, and all the while she was drowning. Every performance was a rescue mission for someone else. But who was rescuing her? Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of Dusty's story is how little has changed. We still worship artists while destroying them. We still demand vulnerability while punishing those who dare to be truly vulnerable. We still celebrate voices like Dusty's, voices that carry the weight of experience, of pain, of hard-won wisdom, without asking what it costs to create such beauty. Dusty Springfield gave us everything she had. And what did we give her in return? Applause, awards. And then, when she needed help the most, silence. But there's also something redemptive in the way Dusty's music endures. More than 2 decades after her death, her voice is still being discovered by new listeners. Her songs are still used in films. Over 50 movies have featured her recordings, using that distinctive sound to evoke longing, nostalgia, the bittersweet ache of love. Every time her voice drifts through a cinema speaker, another lonely girl feels less alone. And that, perhaps, is the miracle Dusty never believed in for herself. When people hear Dusty Springfield, they hear something true, something that speaks to their own hidden pain, their own desperate hope. And in that moment, Dusty is not dead. She is there, in the space between notes, in the catch in the throat, in the impossible beauty of a voice that refused to give up even when everything else did. The house in Henley-on-Thames is still there, though it has changed hands many times. The Thames still flows past, indifferent and eternal. The recording studios where Dusty created her magic are mostly gone, demolished or converted into luxury apartments. But the recordings remain, preserved in vinyl and digital files, archived in museums and streaming services, living in the collective memory of everyone who has ever needed a song to make them feel less alone. Somewhere right now, someone is hearing Dusty Springfield's voice for the first time. They are falling in love with that sound, not knowing the woman behind it, not understanding the pain that shaped it, not aware that every note was a kind of prayer, a plea, a question without an answer. They just hear the beauty. And maybe that's what Dusty wanted all along, not to be known, not to be understood, just to be heard. Just to matter. Just to prove, if only for 3 minutes and 30 seconds, that Mary O'Brien had existed, that she had felt, that she had loved, even if she was never loved back. The stage lights have dimmed. The recording booth is empty. The makeup is washed away. Only the voice remains, suspended in time, forever young, forever searching, forever singing the questions she never got to ask. And in that voice, if you listen closely enough, you can hear everything she couldn't say. I was here. I was real. I mattered. The microphone stands silent. The tape reels have stopped spinning. But somewhere in the darkness, a voice continues, trembling between sorrow and strength, asking one final question that echoes across decades. Did anyone ever truly hear her? Or did they only hear what they wanted to hear? A beautiful voice, a perfect performance, a ghost singing love songs for the living. Who are you when the music stops and no one is listening anymore? The studio is empty now. The lights are off. But on a shelf, gathering dust, sits a reel of tape, an unfinished recording, a song she never completed. The label reads simply, Mary, not Dusty, Mary. As if in those final sessions she was trying to remember who she had been before the transformation, before the wigs and the makeup and the persona. As if she was trying at last to find her way back to the girl from West Hampstead who had fallen in love with music before she learned that love was something she couldn't have. The tape has never been played. Perhaps it never will be. Some voices, after all, are too honest for the world to hear. Somewhere Mary O'Brien is still singing, waiting for the world to be honest enough to listen.